Now, as we enter Yonge Street here, over to your left is Isabella Street. And Isabella Street is part of what the police refer to as Track 1. And it was given this name because the prostitutes, women soliciting on the streets, and the men cruising by in the cars, picking them up. And the police apply that generally to that area of heterosexual prostitution. To our right here, on the right side of Yonge Street, you're right in the middle of the gay commercial community. St. Joseph Street here has gay discotheques, and further down the street, below Wellesley, there are the old established gay bars in Toronto. This has lately become a more popular street for young male prostitutes, hustlers as they call themselves, and Grosvenor Street. And the police have given the name Track 2 to these streets in this neighborhood between Yonge and Bay Street. Unfortunately for many police officers, too many police officers think that the beginning and the ending of the gay community is Track 2.
The smell of fear is in the air, stagnant and oppressive. You're alive and potent. You need to express it. How many shattered lives? No words can pacify. No hands can heal the pain of having to hide it. Outrage burns in your eyes. Your body's urges can't be denied. Forced to defile your sexuality. There's no escape from this modern Third Reich. There's no escape from this endless night. Worship of beauty, seduction, release, trampled by mediocrity, held down by an iron glove, caught in a rain of terror. How many shattered lives? No words can pacify. No hands can heal the pain of having to hide it. Darkness descends on you like a rain of blows and insults. A voice in the shadows cries for the light. There's no escape from this endless night.
there. There's one in here. Everybody out. Sit down. Bring him down here. Sit him down right here. Sit down. Everybody sit down. Shut up. You over there. Come on. Give me that kid. There's one here. One in there? Yeah, got one here. What's going on? Put him out here. You're under arrest.
I find it's kind of hard to know where to start. It seems like so long ago that there weren't any organizations in Toronto. The experience for me personally, prior to the early 70s, 71, 72, was that of being somewhat quite alone in the experience of being a lesbian. And one day a friend that I was working with talked to me, pulled me aside. This was when I was in a supervising situation, to tell me that she in fact was a lesbian, didn't know what to do about it, said she was going to head downtown, and I sort of got very protective. Said, well, if you're going, I'll go downtown with you. You just can't go down there. I'd heard as many horrifying stories as the straight community, I'm sure, had heard about what downtown Toronto was. We went down to a bar, met a few people. They were quite, as a matter of fact, friendly. And it was the first time I started to realize that there could be a sense of community. And I think it was a process of me giving up my own ingrained heterosexual fears.
Now, I have no doubt at that time, a lot of people were simply concerned with the quality of their own lives as gay people, and that's a phrase that's emerged since then. But I'm sure that was not far under the surface, because gay life was very underdeveloped at that time in Toronto. And there was also a general malaise among gay people over in any large city because of the problems they were up against in forming a society of their own. And all of that was there ready to be triggered by things like the spillover of the Stonewall riots in New York. There was already fertile territory there for the whole thing to grow in. And that was, I think, how the movement got started, say, in Toronto.
We heard about a meeting at the University of Toronto and talked about, well, let's go see what this whole thing is about. And I guess that would mark the beginnings of organizing within Toronto. Charlie Hill was one of the main energies behind that, and also George Hislop was present at that meeting. I think there were about 55 men, and myself and Linda.
Well, I first ran into the gay community, I guess, in 1973, when there was a push for an amendment about the city's hiring clauses to try and make it clear that we would not discriminate against anybody on the grounds of sexual orientation. And I guess that was the first time that I, as a politician, had much to do with the gay community in Toronto. And I and a number of other members, the majority of council, supported that particular amendment. I suspect that was one of the first times that local politicians had had a chance to express their views about the gay community. It seemed to me that not much happened from then on. There were problems in respect to things like Halloween, and I and other politicians worked to try and figure out how we could start to calm that event down and make sure that the police, in fact, were beginning to serve the gay community.
For many years, the only contact that Torontonians had with gays was through gathering to watch the promenade before the Halloween drag show at the St. Charles Tavern. However, the event turned ugly as mobs began to hurl eggs, and as a result, gays decided to avoid the area. Every year, people still gather and harass anyone who even appears to be gay.
My only contact, I think the only contact that people in the black community, many people in the black community had with the gay community in the city was the annual Halloween thing on Yonge Street, you know. And I think that's as far as a lot of people wanted to take it, or were even conscious of the fact, of a gay community, a large gay community existing in Toronto.
I think that we have to be very careful when we start talking about communities in terms of gay community or black community. I mean, it's quite obvious that the gay community will also have a number of blacks as part of that community as well. In terms of my own experience, I was thinking back, and I guess it was triggered off by what Pat said about the Halloween parade. I remember coming to Toronto 10 years ago and being told about this parade and standing on the street corner at Yonge and Alexander and really losing interest in the parade itself because I was terrified by the crowd. I was terrified by the kind of excitement among a number of youths, and the insults and that kind of stuff that were being hurled at the people. And of course it was a parade, and the gays were there in costume and all that kind of stuff. But I remember being very frightened by the crowd and having for the first time a sense of how easily a mob could be formed, and being able to imagine myself being the target of that group. And that was scary. And I think that was the first time I ever thought about anything as a gay community in Toronto.
We established CHAT in 1971, and I remember the first meeting that we had with the morality inspector in charge, and he didn't know why we should have a meeting. He didn't know what there was to talk about. It was police policy at that time to go after individuals in parks and washrooms and what have you. And there was an element of entrapment involved. They were acting as agents provocateurs, or they were passively standing by and letting an offense occur in order to make an arrest, something they still do to this day. So I was introduced to then Deputy Chief Jack Aykroyd, and a rapport was established, and I could talk to him on the phone about various trouble areas, and we gradually worked out solutions to these trouble areas through talking to senior police officers.
Well, the police on one hand say they are curbing or keeping the city of Toronto healthy. Their mere actions are in fact encouraging people to remain in the closet, encouraging people to live in fear and to choose subways. The police used to lie in the Bloor subway station in the above the vents in the bath. I couldn't believe that. I mean, I was so naive. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that they would assign 2 police officers to lie on their stomachs and look through these vents to see if they could catch, in fact, someone in a cubicle engaging in sex.
There's been a pro forma gay movement, which has not been ineffective. I mean, it did, in a sense, bring up questions like the amendment of the Ontario Human Rights Code, which was an issue relatively intelligently chosen because it's one around which a lot of people can organize, which they understand and see the utility of. And they managed to bring things with a relatively small number of people involved as far as we got, say, 2 or 3 years ago, when there was, in fact, a government commission that recommended that change be made in the code. Now, I think what has happened in that period is we've seen the growth of essentially the gay male community, more and more gay people reimagining themselves, seeing themselves in a way which they'd never seen themselves before, that is, as members of a minority group. The word community has started to be used a lot. Various other kinds of indications that people no longer think of themselves as gay individuals, but rather as members of a group of people with whom they share a lot and somehow with whom their destiny is bound up.
As I got more aware of the situation, a number of things became concerns to me. Firstly, in connection with my job in my church, was a concern that individuals not believe that they had to leave their church. I was concerned that individuals felt free to express their religious convictions, whatever they were, and not be fed the line and accept that stuff, that they couldn't be Christian, they couldn't be Jewish, they couldn't be whatever, and be gay. Beyond that, though, in a more political sense, very concerned about the human rights codes, because I feel they are a real important issue, that gay people are not protected in the human rights codes anywhere in Canada except Quebec, and that not only do we have these cases of discrimination like John Damien and so on, but even more importantly, we have the fear that people have that they might be fired, that they might be found out and kicked out of their apartment and so on. And I think that changing the human rights codes will help in a long way to lessen that fear. And I guess, in a sense, the politicians may be afraid, because as that fear is lessened, more and more gay people will come out and demand their rights. So in a sense, they are keeping the political power of the gay community down by refraining to protect us in the human rights code, but that's a very basic change that needs to be made.
One of the things that I think the movement, when I was first a part of it, was doing was much a kind of aggressive demanding of rights, identifying of problems, trying to attract media attention, and basically doing that in a really fairly narrow framework with in many ways limited approach, appeal to people, limited ability to reach people. Largely the media wasn't paying attention, and therefore other people weren't finding out. When it began to take on a real scope, I think, is that as those small efforts built and some small impact was beginning to be felt, there came a reaction. We saw the reaction first building in the States with Anita Bryant and her campaign in Dade County. And she was brought up here to Canada by the people who've since become our most visible opponents, Renaissance International and other fundamentalist Christian crowd. And they've served to make it clear exactly how much danger gay people and gay rights are in.
That danger became apparent in August 1977, when Emmanuel Jacks, a 12-year-old shoeshine boy, was murdered by 3 men in the Track 1 strip. Jacks had been sexually abused before the murder, and the resulting barrage of homophobia in the press began to make life difficult for gays.
There seemed to be a switch in policy after the Emmanuel Jacques killing in 1977. They then began to attack the community. Of course, a community was starting to emerge, and organizations were being formed. And we went from one organization to, well, the 40 we have now. And that process was going on, and a definite community was emerging, rather than just a collection of individuals. So the Body Politic newspaper was growing in influence and in its professionalism, its output. And they printed an article about men loving boys, which gave the police an excuse to raid the paper.
This article in the Body Politic magazine dealt with youth sexuality. Another bout of media hysteria evolved, and as a result, the police raided the newspaper and charged 3 staff members with obscenity.
And I guess it was the charges that were laid against the Body Politic at the end of 1978 that in fact really brought the issue to a head about the relation of the police to the gay community. And I think that's the way most politicians like myself saw it. And it was for that reason that in fact I made the decision, as somebody who'd just been elected mayor, to speak at a rally on behalf of the Body Politic. For me, it was a fairly simple matter. Here we were dealing with a community that was under attack. My job as a politician had always been to protect communities, whether they happen to be physical entities or whether they happen to be social entities. So it was fairly natural for me to stand up and speak on behalf of this particular community. At the same time, it seemed reasonable that I should be speaking out in favor of freedom of the press, and that's the way that I saw the issue. And I went further in respect to my statements about the legitimacy of the gay community and the fact that we should be making an amendment to the Ontario Human Rights Code so that people could not discriminate on the grounds of sexual orientation. What was surprising was the reaction of my speech. First, the reaction of those present. I guess people saw it as a bit strange or out of the ordinary that a mayor would come and speak at a meeting of members of the gay community in defense of their newspaper. I didn't see it as strange at all, and I was surprised to see such a very large crowd there and to see the speech receive such well, a standing ovation. It's the first standing ovation anybody had ever given me in my life, and well, I was obviously quite touched. I guess it was at that point that I realized the power of the mayor's office and the extent to which it could be used as an agent of social change. In fact, I'd used the mayor's office to stand up for a community that was really under assault by another faction of the community, which happened to be the police department. The second reaction, though, I hadn't counted on was by people in the community who felt that giving rights to homosexuals, that saying that you should change the Ontario Human Rights Code so that you couldn't discriminate against people on the grounds of their sexual orientation was somehow a bad thing to do, as though the idea of discrimination, in fact, in certain situations was a good idea. I really hadn't counted on people being so vociferous and saying that what I was doing was something that was tantamount to evil. I now, of course, recognize that homosexuals throughout the years have had to put up with exactly that claim. But it wasn't until I put myself on the line as a leading politician that I realized the force of hatred that was unleashed. It happened because the day after my speech, one of the television shows in Toronto, a sort of a holy roller show, had a minister on who talked about what my speech had been and told people to phone City Hall, and sure enough, the phone started to ring off the wall. And so that very quickly, the event turned into a cause célèbre, and I suspect that that event in early January 1979 colored the way that people looked at me as a mayor during the next 2 years. I'm not complaining about it. I think that's exactly what mayors are elected to do. And I believe that good mayors do stand up for communities that are under attack. But I certainly didn't think that ever things would be unleashed in the way, as though all these pent-up emotions and hatred that people had inside them would come spilling out over and sort of wash over politics for the next month or so. And after the foo-furah of the January speech and things calmed down, the nail was hit on the head when, in fact, the decision in respect to the body politic came out, saying that, in fact, there were no grounds for the charges. Later in the year, we found the Anglican Church taking a position of non-discrimination and other groups doing exactly the same thing, and the issue, in my opinion, seemed to have died down. It calmed down, in fact, so much so that I didn't consider it a major issue going into the 1980 election.
In the 1980 municipal elections, George Hislop, backed by the Ward 6 community organization, decided to stand for alderman. Mayor John Sewell, in his bid for re-election, endorsed Hislop as well as other community-based candidates. The media jumped on the story and made homosexuality the major issue of the 1980 election.
There's a total of about 190 polls. We divided it into east and west, and this is the east side. We have 75 canvassers on the east side. We covered, I guess, about 80% of all the polls with 3 canvasses. The first canvas was a sheet of material just introducing George and the metro issues. The second piece was aimed at each community within the ward. The third piece was just endorsements from key community people.
By being elected and being at City Hall, people will know that we are there. That in any discussion, if there's a black person there, you are aware of the need to consider the black community. When women are there, you remember women. The curse of the gay is that we can pass as straights, and we do. Eventually we realized that we had to have a public profile. And when it came time to think about getting into politics, we could actually, again, remind people that gays contribute to the well-being of the city. I'm running for alderman in Ward 6.
The gay community has been going through a process of what the sociologists call institutional completeness. It has had a whole set of new organizations and institutions grow up over the last decade to meet various needs which weren't being met before. George Hislop's election will assist in that process, will provide us with access to government in a way that will allow us to continue the process of meeting the needs that haven't been met within the gay community.
Full day. In the last couple of weeks, the heavy opposition has come out, what I call the capital K Christians, the Ku Klux Klan, the fundamentalists, the real haters who have printed material that the same sort of material that they've printed about Jews and blacks. You know, you can just change the words around and you've got the same stuff. Then there was this piece of literature, the League Against Homosexuals, the LAH. Queers do not produce, they seduce. Question for today's parents and future parents. Do you want your children taught by queers? Do you wish to have your child turn into a queer? Do you wish to kill our future? Remember well, little Emmanuel Jacks, your child could be next. Renaissance International, ironically titled Liberation, Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death. And then subtitle, You Shall Know the Truth, and the Truth Shall Make You Free. They then, of course, proceed to distort just about everything, including Stephen Lewis's position. The records of gay power, gay politics. Radical homosexuals advocate the sexual exploitation of youth. And George Hislop's aldermanic candidacy, a national campaign by radical homosexuals. Queers are against every race and religion. Does our society need queers? No. Who is against queers? All decent citizens, all normal, healthy, heterosexual families, all couples that produce children, all right-wing political parties, all those who believe in Christ and his teachings.
Thank you very much.
And it just rambles on and on and on.
Hislop headquarters.
All right. And just have them identify their poll number, okay? And don't worry, as long as they get their number right, get their name, okay?
Right.
Name and poll number.
Okay.
And just zip from there. And then just hang right up on them. Tell them to go to the party, see you there, okay?
Just give me Chong, Heap, Hislop, and Smith.
Chong, then Heap, then Hislop, then Smith, please.
Okay, Barry, let's go. Starting Alderman Chong.
Eggleton Sewell.
Chong, 39. Heap. Heap, 63. Hislop.
We won this one. Hislop, 75. Fabulous. Smith. 6. Thank you. You're doing it very well. Eggleton.
Thanks for calling. Okay, see you at the party.
Did we win it?
No, we came second by a good margin.
Yeah, we're
a
coming
good
second a lot of them, you know. That's great. Eh?
But I thought we'd, he sounded excited, so I thought we'd win it.
It's my fear that we have to win big in North Jarvis, and some of the early returns we are clearly winning, but it seems to me we may not be winning big enough.
Came in first. Was one of our strong polls.
How do we do?
We won one.
Win it nice?
No, 20 votes.
Yeah, well, we won.
That's nice.
Yeah, that is nice. That's nice. That's terrific. We need to win more. You know? Excuse me.
Hislop headquarters, poll number, please.
I have with me here Mr. Sparrow. Are you surprised by the returns so far?
Yes, I am. The one imponderable was the amount of hate literature dumped in the ward in the last week. There were well over 100,000 pieces put through mail slots. We thought people wouldn't react to it, but George isn't coming in with the kind of numbers we would like to see from the North Jarvis area, north of College, east of Yonge. It's going to be a long night, I think, in terms of figuring out whether he's going to make it or not.
Without the strong showing in the North Jarvis area, Hislop went down to defeat, placing third in a tight race. Mayor Sewell, although increasing his vote from the previous election, was narrowly defeated by an establishment candidate.
It's never easy to lose, but you can't have the hills without the valleys. It's especially difficult when so many people have worked so hard and so long. Certainly, if this election could have been won, It was not lost by any lack of hard work or dedication on the part of those of you involved in the campaign. And I thank you for that. The amount of love that is being shown towards me and towards the people who worked on our campaign and towards our community has been overwhelming. It has vastly outweighed the hate that we've seen demonstrated. Finally, I'd like to thank the person who loves me and who I love very much, Ron Shearer. We survived the Spanish Inquisition. We survived Auschwitz and Dachau. This election, of course, no way compares to those events. However, we will fight on, we will work, and tomorrow we'll have to get back to work on the effort to build for a community-backed alderman in 1982.
It was interesting that in the January 1981 issue of News and Views, the police magazine, that they had a cartoon which was given the award, the best cartoon of the year. It showed a policeman sweeping things up, and it showed him holding somebody by the neck called Sewell, and showing someone in the garbage can with a sign that says Hislop, and the policeman saying, just doing a bit of cleaning up. It was clear that people like me were being put in the garbage can. So the police felt that, in fact, that society had been badly done by people like me and George and the gay community, and they thought we might as well go out and get them right now. And the election gave them that mandate.
I was at home in bed, and a friend called me and said that the baths were being raided, and said, did I want to come down? So I got my tape recorder, he got his camera, and we went down to the club baths. By the time we got there, the raid had been going on, I think, for some time. The policemen were bringing found-ins out, putting them in the paddy wagon. More people came to stand outside, and of course, from time to time, gays came along who were going to go into the baths, and we warned them not to go there, but that wasn't our purpose, really, in being there. It was really to see what was happening so that we could be witnesses subsequently if there was any question, as in fact there now is, about whether the police had done any damage to the premises. We saw them coming out at the time with their crowbars and their hammers and so on.
And it took place in 4 baths in the city of Toronto. If you had have asked me that even 5 minutes before the raid, I would have said, I don't think there's a possibility of a raid at this bath. I just don't believe it. I think it's impossible. I'll have to get some shots of all of this. Yeah, I'm obviously.
You want to try and get that top bit as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, just come towards me so you...
Okay. Obviously, somebody was pushed into the wall there.
Yes, very obviously.
And you have a loop through the wall there, as if that was new.
Okay, can you come on this side of me?
Sure, and I can get... Somebody was thrown up against the wall there as well. I got a shot at him standing over there. Okay. Here's you get a shot at the door. Notice how they just went right for the lock and smashed the whole mechanism. after kicking it by the looks of it as well. That wasn't good enough.
Okay, and can you just stand on that cross side?
The raids were estimated to cost the taxpayers of Toronto $250,000, and police with crowbars and sledgehammers are alleged to have caused over $35,000 damage. The Richmond Street Health Emporium, which sustained the bulk of the damage, has had to go out of business.
I decided to go up to these individuals and I asked them what's going on. And they told me that this is a raid and that we're all fountains. I says, what do you mean a raid? What is a fountain? He says, you're all being charged for being in a body house. I was flabbergasted. I still had no idea what he was talking about. And I said to him, what do you mean a body house? I mean, these places have been in operation for the last 16 years. You people have known about it. Why suddenly tonight, of all nights, it's a body house? At this point, the officer really didn't want to talk to me. He just brushed it off as saying, well, I'm just doing my job. In the meantime, these other men, who were much more rough than these two individuals at the door, just pushed us aside. At least they pushed me aside and a few people next to me. And they proceeded with cutters to start ripping the lockers apart. And people were offering their keys. There were people who actually had keys and said, here, officer, you know, here's my key. We just ignored that and just decided to cut all these locks. And any locker that gave them the slightest little trouble, like if they tried to open it with their finger, they decided, well, that was too much trouble. Suddenly, crowbars appear, and they rip the locker apart. At that point, I really didn't understand still what was going on, and I said to myself, he didn't have to do that. That was just malicious. Suddenly, we hear a great thunder of noise above us. It sounded like doors being smashed, and we heard glass being broken. It was a very terrifying feeling, because it comes all suddenly, like a blitzkrieg. And coming from a family that went through the Holocaust in Europe, come from a Jewish family, I was very aware of this imagery that I was facing that night, and it just seemed too reminiscent for me. It was that night that I realized what my parents must have been going through when they had to stand naked in a concentration camp. And it's very hard to understand that sometimes, because intellectually you can understand it, but emotionally you don't understand it. And that night I understood it, and it was quite horrifying.
Body Politic's having its 10th anniversary issue coming up this December, and we've been covering news in this city for those 10 years, and without a doubt it seems this has got to be the biggest story we've ever had to cover. It's taxed what resources we have just to try to get the news in. It's the biggest story, I think, not only from our point of view, but just from the point of view of anybody who's pretty much concerned with civil liberties in this city. It's not just a big gay story, although that's what it is. You know, we've had probably more support from a wide variety of groups on this story than we've ever had on anything. And well, when it comes right down to it, you know, even the statistics show it. You've got more people being arrested in one night than any other time before in the city, and only the second largest number before in Canadian history, as I understand it, since at least 10 years ago with the War Measures Act.
I heard about the raids when I had a call late at night that night. I'd been up working on a feature for the Body Politic. It was such a violation of the entire community, I felt. And hard to believe it had happened on that scale and that unexpectedly, that drastically, dramatically. And the numbness gave way to fury. Women and men in the community went from disbelief to just rage. Rather than letting that anger weigh us down, debilitate and demobilize us, we were able to channel it into a collective statement. Basically, we were there for each other when we needed each other the most. And that was how the demonstration felt. Spontaneous, I mean, very spontaneous, and not in the sense that someone didn't try to get people there, but certainly in the sense that we had no idea when we asked people to be on that corner that night if anyone would be there, or how many would be there, or what mood they'd be in. That request to be at that corner at that time really tapped a current of feeling in the community, and people responded to it.
Anyone who's ever done anything like this, like being in Yonge Street or something like this, it's obvious people are really, really angry at this and they want to put an end to it right away.
Can you think of any political reasons that the police did this, or was it simply, as they said, a matter of commonplace crowd practice?
Well, you know, while we were there last night, two of the officers were standing next to each other, and one of them joked that if John Sewell and George Hislop had been elected, this wouldn't have happened.
No more raids! 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 What do we do about the raids apart from this demonstration? Apart from this 1 hour out here? Well, the first thing you gotta know is that the barracks and the Romans and the Club Toronto are open again. They're open and operating. They're not going to be intimidated, neither should we. 2, 4, 6, 8, Toronto's a police state. 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 2, 4, 6, 8.
It's quite extraordinary. A friend of mine who's been much more involved politically in the movement than I have said to me, for years we've been out front trying to pull people along with us, and now everybody's out front pulling us. And that's the effect, I think, of the turnaround. I went on the Friday after the raid, the day after the raid, I was involved with the committee that set up the rally. And I remember sitting there as people talked about having a rally at Wellesley and Yonge Street and how we blocked the intersection, thinking this is ridiculous. The biggest rally we've ever had before, in fact a rally that was held here in this hall, was not big enough to block the sidewalk, and the notion of blocking the intersection was just, to me, out of the question. So I was absolutely amazed when I went over at 11:45 on Friday night and saw that the intersection was already blocked, and plainly the police were amazed as well. They were totally unprepared for that kind of reaction.
This is incredible, and they think they're going to get away with it. That's when I decided to myself, they're not going to get away with it. I said, I knew somehow that this was so horrendous what these people were doing, that all of these faggots in this building were not going to walk away and let this happen. But I had my doubts. It was maybe the courage of the moment, and I thought, well, maybe they will react that way. But the next night proved me that I was right on my first intuition, that what they call a riot was more a release of frustration and anger built up for a decade. That finally, you know, almost 4,000 or 5,000 faggots, and I use that word with pride now, suddenly marched through the street and took over the street and confronted the police. Toronto had never seen anything like that, and the police were not capable of handling it. The roadblock they built at Dundas and Yonge was pathetic. And when they had to bring out the entire police force to surround the building, you know, It was like back in my student days in the 60s. It was like the anti-war movement all over again.
Well, I guess on the whole, I'm feeling tired, but on the whole, I'm feeling exhilarated because the reaction was so fast. You know, at midnight on Thursday, the cops come down and arrest 273 people. Midnight on Friday, you've got 3,000 gay people and their friends in the streets, and they're practically tearing down the doors of the legislature. I mean, you can't help but feel really, really great that you've got a community out there that's not going to go crawling back into the hole. And, you know, since that day, it's what, it's been a week now or so, you know, we've had the school board, the Civil Liberties Association, half of Toronto City Council, all come out and say this is really, really bad. We need explanations of it. This is making Toronto a kind of a hellish city that nobody wants to live in and every minority is afraid of. So the support's been fantastic.
I think we're seeing this evening as people are gathering the results of the actions that we're taking. Last night, the Inter-City Church Council at Lower Bathhouse met representatives from the Anglican, Roman Catholic, United, Baptist, Quakers, and NCCs. We met, and they voted on a resolution requiring an independent inquiry, and the vote was 23 to 3. The Baptists supported it. Well, the politicians ignore us, the police abuse us, and the right wing lie about us.
The raids and arrest of members of the Toronto gay community is a further indication that the police force of this city is lacking in discipline and proper supervision. The police force in this city is being used as a political tool by politicians, such as the Attorney General Roy McMurtry and Premier William David, to achieve their personal and political aim at the expense of the people of Ontario.
200 police officers in the intelligence squad, another 65 or 70 in the morality bureau. So a big chunk of the police budget is dedicated to intelligence. We've argued in the past that a lot of that is directed towards infiltrating community groups, dealing with labor activities, and harassing people who are critics of the police. And we've had a number of experiences over the years where that's been the pattern.
What you're seeing here today is, a lot of people standing outside and freezing in the cold, and this is the kind of public access that this board gives to the citizens of this city.
The police in Toronto were controlled by a board of commissioners of 5 people, 3 of whom were appointed by the provincial government, 2 of whom were appointed by the metropolitan level of government. It means that the City of Toronto, city politicians, that is, the politicians representing the inner part of the Toronto area, have no control at all over the police department. And I, as the mayor, in fact, had no say whatsoever in police policies. And in fact, the situation was even worse than that. Police matters were considered to be outside of the realm of normal political debate. If you were a politician, such as I'd been for a number of years, raising the questions of why the police budget, which was $180, $200, $230 million in size each year, raising the issue of why the budgets were so flimsy, printed on 1 or 2 pages of paper, what I would find is thrown back in my face, if you don't like it, then you're really after crime on the streets. And so an attempt to raise an administrative matter about the police, in fact, always provoked hostility on the part of the police. Trying to raise other matters, such as how it is that the police functioned as an organization and how they related to various concerns, was much, much more difficult. For instance, I had a major run-in with the police about their relationship with minority communities, particularly blacks and Southeast Asians. And on a number of occasions, I had to stand up strongly against the police in favor of those minorities.
Chairman and members of the Police Commission, I'm here representing a group of aldermen from the City of Toronto who now represent the majority of aldermen in the City of Toronto, and a group of private citizens from the city representing all political parties and all walks of life. A number of us are going to speak and speak briefly to you today. On Tuesday, February the 10th, I and a group of aldermen and citizens came together to express our concern regarding the recent raids on 4 clubs, and the arrest in excess of over 250 people. I have attached our statement as well as a list of people who are associated with this brief. It is clear that this event has produced outrage on the part of many sectors of Toronto's population. Explanations are needed.
Chairman, I think it would be a mistake if you were to assume that our request for this independent investigation had something to do with being anti-police. I think the police have demonstrated, particularly the night of the demonstration that followed the arrests, that they can behave extremely well. We would assume that if the same orders had been given before the raids, a great deal of what happened might not have. We want to know why, at a time when violence is escalating in this city, when we are having more rape, more violence on the subway, more domestic murders, why the police felt that this was a high priority. I think we need an answer to that question, and it's fair to ask it.
Right.
I start with the conclusion to request that this police commission endorse the request that the Canadian Civil Liberties Association made a few days ago, calling upon Solicitor General Roy McMurtry to establish an independent inquiry into the events in question.
Because of the brutal and Nazi-like actions of some of the police force last Thursday and Friday,
Into the mic, Brent.
I am no longer able to pursue the moderate approach. Where are your priorities? People of Toronto need protection, not harassment. We tell you to get out of our clubs, get out of our homes, and get out of our bedrooms and get back to fighting the crime on the street.
It's a very strong history in Scripture and throughout the history of the Christian Church where ministers and leaders of the church have been called to stand up to political authorities who are being unjust. And I felt that it was my call to stand up and to speak very, very loudly. I think it's important that gay Christians take a very, very strong stand, and I continually say this to my church, that we of all people should be speaking out, okay? If we believe that God is supporting us, if we believe that if we're within the space that God would have us to be, that we will be okay.
We're angry because of your lack of sensitivity. There was obviously no attempt by the officers in charge of the raid to require restraint on the part of the raiding policemen. The newspapers reported that most of the officers were given absolutely no instructions in advance. The resulting rampage of unnecessary destruction and verbal abuse by the police was therefore supported by the officers in charge. You may respond by saying, well, why don't you go lay a complaint? Well, why should we lay a complaint? We've seen in the past, and the black community have seen in the past, that when we go to lay a complaint, what usually happens is the complainant is charged with something, or their home is raided.
The night of Thursday, February the 5th, will go down in history in this city as a night of infamy. It is tragic that so much work has been destroyed by so few people. I want to ask the Commission, have any of you gone down and seen what happened down there? No.
Have you? Answer. Who has?
Where is Roy McMurtry? No one can find him. The Commissioner Paul Godfrey says it is not a matter of brutality. It is law. Godfrey is trying to turn it all around. We are not objecting to anyone enforcing the law. We are objecting to the way the law is being enforced.
What can be more independent fori than the courts of law?
It isn't law.
As the Globe and Mail reported, the three commissioners sat impassively throughout the meeting taking notes. Commissioner Dennis Flynn left after an hour. Mr. Given said all 5 commissioners, including absent Metro Chairman Paul Godfrey, had decided before the meeting not to support a public inquiry.
The underbelief is that somehow the Police Commission really was interested in setting things right. Somehow justice could come from these 5 political hacks, and that they really were going to look into the situation, see if anything had been done wrong, and if it had, as we all know it had, it would inevitably result in somebody being fired or dismissed or punished in some way. And so, see, there's still a lot of naivete there that people are gradually being disabused of, and I'm sure they will be as a result of this, the total failure of the political structure to come to deal with what has happened in any concrete way, to even acknowledge that anything unpleasant has occurred.
If the police have gotten the message to go ahead over the last few years and have done this, what's going to happen now that they're getting this clear message that even in this obvious case of abuse, even this is an example, when the majority of this city feel they abused their powers, nothing is being done. And that to me clearly indicates that in the future, not only the gay community, but other minority communities as well, are in real problems. And we need to stem that tide right now. And that's why we need to have action now before it's too late. I don't want Toronto to become a Miami. I don't want us to have to get to that escalated state of confrontation, because it's harder than to diffuse it. It's harder than to have reconciliation. We need to do it now. And sometimes we're too complacent. Sometimes we sit back and say, well, it's not so bad. But you have to look at the trends and where we're heading and stop those trends now.
We've been very instrumental in helping to set up CIRPA, which is a civilian independent review of police action, which is a citizens group of many ethnic groups and many other minorities in conjunction with the gay community. That's the most exciting thing about what's happening in the gay community, because we're now being accepted as a community by other minority communities. I go to meetings with the Sikhs, and I'm welcomed as a brother. I go to meetings with the blacks. I go to meetings with Chinese, with West Indians, and we suddenly realize that we have a common enemy.
There was considerable pressure after the Bathhouse raids in Toronto to have a full-scale public inquiry into the police action in the raids. However, this was refused by the various authorities. And finally, 2 aldermen proposed to City Council that they conduct a study into the raids, and the City Council accepted this.
The Bruner report was completed in 60 days and had 3 major recommendations. The establishment of a police gay dialogue committee, the chief of police to clarify to all senior officers that the gay community constitutes a legitimate minority within the community, that the Government of Ontario amend its policy on human rights legislation to prohibit discrimination on account of sexual orientation. Although the recommendations of the Bruner report were not implemented, a public debate ensued. The official who authorized the raids, Staff Inspector Donald Banks, head of the Intelligence Bureau, was forced to defend the police position on a local call-in program, The Charrington Show.
Today on Charrington, can the homosexual community and the so-called straights in society ever live in peace? Can we reach an end to this constant bickering? This is Charrington Live, and with your help, lively for the next 90 minutes.
I think Vancouver, as a city in Canada, has made important strides in that direction, and I don't see why Toronto can't go in that direction as well.
We're going to make progress. It's going to be slow, though, because we've got to get at the root of it, is what I call homophobia. Until we do that, it's going to be very slow going, but I think we will come of age in our society.
In other words, whatever my sexual orientation is, whether I like sex standing up or sitting down, should not be part of my employment within the force.
Nobody thinks that anti-Semitism is socially acceptable, and no one, I think, a few years from now will think that gay bashing or homophobia is socially acceptable.
Body Politics quotes Mr. Bruner, claimed he was not calling for special status for the gay community, merely asking that all members of the public be treated equally. And I think that this is what we are doing, and I have to go along with the words. We're mixing words. Whether you are recognizing the community and the ethnic way of looking at it, or looked upon the other way. And I think, Professor, you would go along with me in the thinking that many homosexuals, whether they be waiters, hairdressers, are acceptable in the community.
What about doctors and lawyers?
Sure.
You see, like that's another, there you go again, you see, in the way in which you describe and shape up and frame what is a gay person. You know, like that's really unacceptable.
Or a doctor, a lawyer, what else?
No,
what
I'm saying is I, as the community out there, using the facilities of a restaurant, of a hairdresser, and people that are apparent, they tell you they're gay, are acceptable within the community. No one is saying, oh, because you're a homosexual, I'm not going to have you serve me food, or I'm not going to have you do my hair. And I think it's working on the words that has been put here between acceptable in the community, equal in the community. No one, the chief of police, does not deny that you have equal rights in respect to the services of the police service in the community. Where the confrontation lies is when someone breaks the law. But what we're talking about, though, what we're talking about is very much the opposite of seeing the gay community as simply a criminal element. Now, this is a very serious problem. For example, the arrest of over 300 people, the largest arrest of people since the War Measures Act a year ago today. That was unnecessary if what you were trying to do was simply to close up those baths. Those baths could be closed up and could be handled in a variety of different ways. There's not a public meeting of the Right to Privacy Committee, for example, that goes on that is not infiltrated by secret police. Now, that is taxpayers' dollars. Why are the secret police there? They are there because they believe somehow that we are a criminal element. Now that is the problem. The problem is that all through the gay community, whether it's religious organizations, whether it's bars, whether it's baths, whether it's clubs, all these places are infiltrated by the secret police. The police, in fact, have a special operation dealing with this issue. And this comes out of a kind of collective homophobia, a belief that somehow gay people are especially criminal. When we learn of an offense being committed and an officer brings that information to me, then he, as an independent agent of the Crown, proceeds and brings them before the courts. We're not always right. We have reasonable and probable grounds to believe the alleged offense is taking place, and we have a justice system that brings that into that area. Now, the militant side of it, they talk about demonstrations and such. They create far more interest from the community by inconveniencing them, tying up traffic, marching, which they're going to do this Saturday, to bring out their point. Instead of using their Body Politic magazine, which they they put out monthly to show a positive step. That magazine I have found is continually negative to the homosexual community in order to keep this connotations going and festering, if you want to call it festering. Police officers are only interested in the areas where an offense is being committed. We must take action. The Bathhouse raids, I could have been criticized if I had strung it over the summer.
And the militancy and the radicalism, whatever you want to call it, comes out of people saying, look, enough is enough. We have our own lives and we're going to live them.
The attitude toward gay people in the police in general is that it's a criminal group. That may sound a bit strong, but in fact, whenever there is a gathering of gay people, the police feel that they have to be there. And when you ask for an explanation as to why they have to be there, the softest explanation I heard was that, well, they attract crime, and we should be there to protect them. Well, the gay community feels that it doesn't need that kind of protection, any more protection than a gathering of Kiwanians or the B'nai B'rith should have.
Evidence appeared in the press that undercover police played an active role in gay demonstrations after the raids. They were photographed holding the main banner and later arresting people in the crowd. Police denied the charge that the undercover officers were acting as agents provocateurs at the rally. Even after this film of the man and the woman on the right and the two men on the left was shown to Staff Inspector Banks, no disciplinary action was taken.
It's easy to be accused of being a cynic when one has what I consider to be a realistic view of power relations in our society, but no, it didn't surprise me at all, because I've always had the notion that the police are more or less as they've revealed themselves in this particular event. Unless you have any other reason to question it, you generally believe what you're taught, you know, when you grow up. And in this province, one grows up believing that basically society is organized as it should be, that it maximizes what benefits there are for everyone, and that things are done through channels by the government and by official agencies. And it takes something really personal and wrenching to make people realize that, in fact, that's not the case. And I think there's been a succession of such events over the last 6 months, which have changed the way a lot of gay people look at all of that.
The last 3 years have been a legacy of failure for the gay community. And part of the reason is that those of us who call ourselves moderates, we've been in control of the gay, almost absolute control of the gay community over the last 3.5 years. And if you look at the history of any movement, I believe you'll see that it's only when there are moderates, but also people who are willing to take stronger action, that people in power listen. And for the last 3.5 years, we haven't had anybody taking stronger action. And when we take those actions, then the politicians will go to the moderates and compromise. Then they'll go to the moderates and say, okay, let's sit down and talk about it, let's do something. I'm just hoping there'll be some moderates around at that time for them to go to listen to.
Well, certainly we saw the anger build as the outrage built, as people refused to respond to the demand for an inquiry into the police behavior, as people were made aware of what had actually happened and what kind of laws these were and how they were being manipulated, how they were basically nuisance charges that were going to clog up the courts for months, if not years, and how they were, the real crime and punishment were really incidental to the way people were really going to be punished and what their real crime was seen to be by the police. In other words, they were going to be dragged into the public eye, they were going to be dragged through the courts for being gay, for engaging in consenting sex with another adult of the same sex in private. So the anger built, the response built and spread beyond the gay community.
A gay rights issue. We in the labor movement view it fundamentally as a human rights issue, which we will fight on every front. We will fight this for every minority group, and I remember the fatuous statement made by the chairman in this city, would you in fact take the same kind of position if it was another group? And we emphatically would say we would support any group when there's excess police harassment, excess police raiding, and if anyone knows in this community about excessiveness of police, historically the labor movement knows it better than anyone else.
La liberté ne se donne pas. Ce sont les hommes et les femmes qui prennent dans leurs mains la liberté dont ils ont besoin afin de pouvoir parachever leur vie. Et dans les existences de l'humanité, toujours, les hommes et les femmes ont été obligés de se déclarer et de s'ouvrir aux autres humains afin de pouvoir élargir les routes sur lesquelles ils doivent marcher en pleine connaissance d'amour et de justice. And it is this simple message which I bring you, that liberty and freedom are not things that people can give to anybody. They are instruments of life which men and women must assume. It is not charters of right, glorious as they may be, that protect the liberties and the freedoms of people. They do in many ways. But it is essentially in the living and the assuming of one's liberty and freedom that one lives it. And we live in a society in North America and in Canada which tends in many ways to limit our rights and our liberties and our freedoms, largely because our color, our religion, our speech, our accent, or the way we make love may be different than other people. And as long as we in silence accept that these differences be causes of anarchy, police brutality, and political skepticism and malpractice, man shall never be free.
This always happens to me. It's what you get for being short. First reason I'm here is that when somebody phoned me up and said, would you do this? And I said, who else have you got? And they said, we don't have anybody yet. So I said, okay, I'll do it. But the real reason that I'm here is that it always did make me want to throw up to see big kids beating up little kids on the schoolyard. And I always used to wonder why they did that. And I think the answer is that they could. Or they thought they could. And it was fun, and it gave them a sense of power. And when I heard about I live a sort of retired life. I don't read a lot of newspapers, but when I heard about the Bathhouse raid, somebody said to me, the police have raided the bathhouses. And I said, what if they got against cleanliness? I would be very angry if I were taking a bath. And somebody thought they had the right to come and kick down my door. So I'm here really because behavior of this kind, people think that they can beat up on supposedly powerless smaller groups because it's fun, and because they think they can get away with it, makes me angry, makes me sick. And I don't see why anybody in a society that calls itself a democracy should have to suffer from institutionalized contempt.
For the first time, I start conceiving of myself being a member of a gay community. Prior to that, I mean, when I heard people talk about the gay community, I always laughed because I said, what gay community? We're basically a group of strangers who only know each other from the waist down, and that's it. I mean, I have nothing in common with these individuals except sex, a very casual sexual encounter. But now I realize that there were forces afoot in the world that were now picking on us as a minority. And whether we liked it or not, whether we thought of ourselves as a minority, we were a minority through adversity.
The Christian right, moral majority in the States, Renaissance Canada and their friends here, are trying to impose their view of the world, their code of ethics, behavior, on the entire North American continent, and probably further than that if they can. Much of the way they're able to get away with what they do is because they allow people to see issues like the issues raised by the feminist movement and the issues raised by gay liberation as moral ones and not political ones, as issues of morality and not civil or human rights. And many of us who should be responding to that and responding to their attacks have conceded them that ground, have left aside commenting on those questions and making a defense of those rights in what is a really, really dangerous precedent, because to give them any ground at all is to leave where we're standing as a crowded, tighter, more oppressed place.
One of the things that's surprised me in the last week or 2 weeks has been the response of people who relatively recently had wanted nothing at all to do with the political movement, who accepted the Attorney General's line that there were a few radical militants who were causing trouble for all the nice, sensible, ordinary gays. It's a reaction that is happening a lot among middle-aged people like myself, who've always thought of themselves as somehow apart from the radical gay movement, which they see as a generation younger than themselves. They now see that there's no way that you can separate the one from the other, and that in fact this increasing identification, not just of the gay movement as a whole with one cause, but of the gay movement with the women's movement and increasingly with the black movement and others who feel that the powers of authority are being used arbitrarily against them.
I think we have to keep making those links. I think it is very important, and what I see the gay community doing now in terms of its organization is that it is helping people to make those links. The community is talking very articulately, very clearly about the issues that's involved. That it's not even really a matter of sex, of protecting people's rights to the sexual preference. It really is about human rights in a very fundamental level. It's saying to people that you cannot expect individuals to exist in some kind of half-free state. The only time I think anybody ever tried to do that very seriously were the Americans after the abolition of slavery, in which you had certain rights and you didn't have other rights. And it doesn't work. It's crazy. And what we have to do is to get not simply politicians, not simply school board people, but the entire society making that kind of analysis. And that, for me, is the importance of the organization of the gay community, because they are saying those things in very real terms, so that you have people who might have been frightened of even talking about homosexuality, going beyond that and seeing the real issues involved and really making an attempt to deal with it.
It's a year and 3 months since the raids occurred on the 4 baths, and just under a year when it occurred on the other 2 baths. In total, those 6 baths being raided had 304 people arrested. Now, to date, in court, we have seen 170 trials, and that's over half, just barely over half. We will actually reach 200 by May the 25th, so we're getting there. We're finally getting through these. These are just the found-in trials that I'm talking about. Of those 170, 3 decisions still have not come down from the judges. They've been adjourned to a point in the future, and yet more arguing is going to go on, and a decision will come. Out of the remaining 167, we have won 139. And that's pretty good averages. In fact, it's sort of unheard of. However, we have lost 28. And of those losses, 11 cases have been people who went in and pleaded guilty. And I'm afraid that tomorrow there's another one, but we'll have to deal with that later. People whose lawyers didn't really think that they had a proper defense. People who really weren't a part of our community, didn't have the support to be able to go there and say, no, I'm not guilty, and to have a lawyer. Because some of these people did go in totally on their own, and there wasn't much that we could do. I grabbed one man just before he was about to plead guilty, and I told him to sit down, be quiet, and I'd look after his case, and we won it. And however, they're starting to pick at us a little here and a little there, a little over there, and it's sort of almost as if we forget about the fact that we're still under attack. And it's really important for us to be aware of the fact that Glad Day bookstore was raided. The fact that the body Politic was raided and is probably going to experience charges over another article that they've written.
Gays are the only people, or group of people, that it's legitimate to discriminate against. And I said to myself, whose fault is this really? It's basically our fault. Because as scattered individuals, we could do nothing. But once we start coming together, once we start forming and conceiving ourselves as a community, then we have strength. Not only in Toronto, but it's going to have to be a national strength. And maybe ultimately, gay people the world over are going to have to unite.
Well, like all frightening events, the raids have managed to organize the community. And I think that what they've said to a lot of people, both inside the gay community and outside of it, is that, in fact, we've got to get political. This idea of hanging on the fringes and hoping that the world will be nice to minorities, whether it happens to be gays or blacks or Jews or whatever, simply isn't good enough. That what's required is organized activity of most political kind, where in fact one tries to change in the organs of public action. And I guess one could say that that's salutary. I never think that awful acts are. I don't believe that things like the Bathhouse raid lead to a better society. I think they lead to a worse society. But I'm obviously pleased that things have loosened up enough in Toronto that many members of the gay community feel that they can state very strongly that this is now a political issue and has to be dealt with in that way. And I think that if in fact we could make that point, we quickly find that there could be some new balance where in fact if you happen to be homosexual in Toronto, you don't feel as though you're in danger wherever it happens to be that you're walking around in the city.